don't ever really ask, but can everybody hear me all right? All right, glad to know that. As always, because of the subject matter, I'd like to go ahead and start with a couple disclaimers on it. Read off Exodus 23:13. We're told, not to, I'm sorry, that's good. That's it. And in all things that I have said to you, take heed and make no mention of the name of other gods, neither let it be heard out of your mouth. And once again, this idea is that we're invoking them on our behalf. We're trying to receive benefit from them by calling upon that name. And we're instructed only to call upon the name of the Lord. That's not what we're doing here. Any names that are mentioned are surely purely for our education on the subject. Why study the Old Testament? We got a couple admonitions there in the New Testament that tells us that these things that happened in the past, you go to 1 Corinthians 10, 11, and 12, it says, now these things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction, on whom the end of ages has come. Therefore let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall. And in Romans 15:4 it says, for whatever was written in former days was written for our instruction, that through endurance and through the encouragement of the Scriptures we might have hope. So we got both Peter and Paul instructing us that these are things we ought to care about. By way of a little bit of refresher, I think most people have been here for the other two lessons on this subject. Sorry we went a little long last time and might end up being a little bit shorter this time. But a bit more of a focus on directly what these gods were attributed to being in control of and how these plagues went directly against them. As I said before, in ancient Egypt, it was kind of like the Apple App Store, where they got an app for this, Egypt, they had a god for that. And a lot of times these responsibilities, characteristics, attributes that are given to them have a lot of overlap. And then depending on where you jump in history, they might have slightly different names. The Egyptians, they didn't have an overarching mythology that was congruent, that applied everywhere. Different people believed different things. They had many multiple creation stories by way of an example there. It's not like where you go to the Bible and even if somebody has a different interpretation of what it means, it's essentially the same story. Yeah, they didn't have that. You would have had a bunch of different competing beliefs that were all attributed to the same group of deities. It's one of the things that makes it a little bit confusing to go digging around on the subject because you can feel a bit more muddled as you come out of it. But so highlighting the main ones that are pretty much universally accepted with these attributes, like with the first plague, we had water to blood. That would have been Osiris primarily. That was the judge of the Lord of the dead. In this, you receive a judgment against them. The way they would have thought of it is there's no afterlife. The one responsible for afterlife has been taken out. When it comes to the frogs, that was Hek. That was the fertility goddess. So you got no childbirth, the one that's responsible for that. No new life. You got lice, that would have been Geb. Geb was the earth. That was the deity that was associated. And like I said, there's other deities that could be associated and tied into these plagues. But those are the primary ones on that. He was god of the earth, natural forces. So now, and with that lice, they're now unclean, so they're not able to go into their temples. So we got Osiris, which means no afterlife. You got Hek, so there's new life, and now you got nobody to be able to call to for help in anything that's going on. In those, you also have that same pattern that I talked about before, where in the first one, Moses goes to him early in the morning when he's down by the river. In the second one, he goes to Pharaoh in his place, like in his palace. And in the third one, he just does it. You have that play out again on 4, 5, and 6, and on 7, 8, and 9. So these first three affect everybody. The rest of the plagues, God's going to make a distinction between his people and the people of Pharaoh. They're not going to affect the people of Israel. You got flies. Main one on that one, Shu, god of the air, devours the people, their grain storehouses. So now you got like no comfort, no peace. I don't know if y'all ever had a fly just stuck in the house that keeps buzzing around. It makes things unbearable. And we're not even talking the type that have to miss. A mosquito is one thing where it's biting you, but even just a regular, ordinary house fly is a pest. It's a distraction. You can't even relax and just enjoy the day or the afternoon. It takes away all your comfort and peace. Fifth one would have been our livestock, primary deity there. Like there's a lot of those quote unquote deities that are associated with livestock, but the main one would have been Hathor. I believe that's who they were worshiping at the base of the mountain when Moses went up to get the commandments. That's what the description there reads, like Hathor worship. But those livestock there, with Hathor, that would have been main goddess in charge of love, dance, joy, protection. So if you think of like what the inverse happens when all these different types of livestock die, because I want to make that clear. It wasn't that all the livestock died. It was like that all the types of livestock died. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to have, calves in the firstborn plague, or calves, or any cattle being killed in the hailstorm, because they'd all be dead. And now we got a contradiction. Well, no contradictions exist, so we have to make sure that we're reading in the right context there, and that just means all types of livestock were killed during that. I also think about like what the chore it would have been. It's not like something that you can just ignore afterwards. You got to now dispose of all these bodies. You got to dig them up. You got to drag them. And now, if a lot of your livestock's dead, now you got to find some means of being able to pull them out of the field, pull them out of the barn. It's not like you got a truck you can just go fire up and throw a winch around and drag her on out. So I imagine this is making life very burdensome. And like I mentioned before, on these plagues, we got an idea like it's like in the Charlton Heston movie where it's just back to back to back to back. Like this plague happens next day, this plague happens next day. I don't know what the time period was, but at the very, very least on any of this, you're looking at a minimum of 2 to 3 months. I think most places would put the estimate at somewhere between 4 to 6 months for everything to play out. We can have an idea of what that timeline looks like by working backwards. We know when the first Passover is going to be. It's going to be in the month of Abib on the 10th to the 14th. So we can work backwards from that date to figure out when it's most likely that a lot of these plagues took place. When you get to plagues 7 and 8, well, let's just finish this one out. So boils, that would have been Sekhmet, Isis, magic, healing, pestilence. Like that's what's being gone against. The gods that are supposedly able to avert a pandemic, if you will, they're not able to do so. The ones that are supposed to be able to heal you, they're not able to do so. It says that Pharaoh's magicians weren't able to stand before him when Moses came that last time. So this is something that's affecting everybody to such a state that they're laid up. They can't walk. They got boils on their feet. I don't know if you ever had a boil, but it's pretty painful. And to be covered in them, I think would be probably pretty unbearable. And I don't know if they finished all the work that gotten done, just here the other day, because they've got all these dead animals all over the place that they got to get rid of. They probably still ate up from a bunch of sores, or did those heal? I don't know. We don't get an exact timeline in there. But if you work it through on a natural progression of, you got to kind of let one lesson take effect before you go visit the next punishment. I imagine there's a little bit of a time period there where they're healing up so that they can truly appreciate the next one that's coming down the pipe their way. Going back to that timeline, if you look at we covered last time on the locust, or on the hail. The hail came in and it killed the flax and the barley. Barley can be used for food, but primarily it was used for drink. Flax would have been primarily for clothing. So these are industries. We've lost our industries of a lot of the livestock that can be transporting goods. Anything that's going to be used for, say, getting wool off of it, being able to turn leather into goods, transportation, things that exist in agriculture. You've lost a lot of that. That's like a huge blow economically to this region. Now, We also had the flies and the scarabs, which would have ate up a lot of their storehouses, the things that they've saved, their savings, so to speak. Their savings accounts got ate up. Then the things that they're using to make a living currently, those get ate up. Now even just the regular labor that I'm going to be able to do with my own shoulder, well, that's getting hindered because I'm laid up with these boils. And then we get to the point of like, well, I can look to the future a little bit. I got these crops that are growing in. They'll replace the things that I'd already stored up and the money that I'm not making right now. Like, we're going to be all right. We'll get through this. Here comes the hail. So my hope for the future just got smashed right off the bat, and it kills off that flax, kills off that barley. So now you can't, because if barley's going to be used for this drink, so that I can go ahead and maybe drown some of my sorrows. Well, that gets pushed aside. I'm not going to be able to not confront this problem. But hey, at least I still got the wheat coming in. The wheat and the emmer, I'm going to be able to have that coming in. And, I might not have my drink, but now I got my food. I'll be able to fill my belly still. This will be all right. We'll rebuild. This will be all right. Wait, what? We got another plague coming? Okay. Locusts. And now it eats up everything that's green. And these seasons would have overlapped. So that's where we can try and figure out that timeline a little bit. You can look at... I don't know exactly how they determine that they have these records of when the planting and the harvest seasons would have been, but they loosely overlapped. You would have had the flax and the barley planted, say, somewhere around the January, February time period, and it would be coming to maturation at the beginning of end of February, beginning of March, and then you had your wheat and your emmer, which was closely behind it by a couple weeks. I would have thought initially there was maybe a couple months, but it was more like a couple weeks between that harvesting. So it's sprouted up and it's green, but it's not tall enough and it's not ready to be harvested. And that's what gets destroyed by these locusts. So starting there with that plague now, in Exodus 10, 1 through 7, we'll start there. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go into Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I may show these signs of mine among them, and that you may tell in the hearing of your sons and your grandson how I have dealt harshly with the Egyptians, and what signs I have done among them, that you may know that I am the Lord." So Moses and Aaron went into Pharaoh and said to him, "Thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I will bring locusts into your country, and they shall cover the face of the land, so that no one can see the land. And they shall eat what is left to you after the hail. And they shall eat every tree of yours that grows in the field. And they shall fill your houses and the houses of all your servants and of all the Egyptians, as neither your fathers nor your grandfathers have seen, from the day that they came to this earth." Then he turned and went out from Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh's servants said to him, "How long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the men go, that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not yet understand that Egypt is ruined?" Pharaoh's own people are starting to they're getting vocal about turning on him. It's like we were just laying out a minute ago, even if this is over the course of, 2-3 months, it's been a bad 2-3 months. It's first it was a little inconvenience with some water, and I can't cook bread right now, and maybe my view on religion and how this all affects to me, it's kind of gone to crap where I'm questioning a lot of things. But I'm living, life's going on all right. Wait, what? Oh, everything I saved up's gone. Okay, well, it's not, we can grow more stuff and we can store more stuff. Wait, oh, now my livestock that sits there and helps me to do those things, they're wiped out. Okay, well, that's a bit of a problem. I got all these painful boils. Okay, that's a problem. Okay, well, my crops that are coming in, they just got destroyed. Well, that's a problem. Well, I got more crops, we just got a bad, wait, those crops got destroyed too? I mean, things they look dire. This is where the people are getting pretty hopeless and they're getting pretty fed up with Pharaoh. I think it's miraculous that God, He's laid this all out in a way where it makes Him easy to be believed, to be in charge of everything. he's correcting the people that, all those guys that you worship that you think are responsible for this and that, they're nothing. I'm in charge. I rule over all is within my dominion. And I think that's probably why when you get to Exodus 12, it sits there and it reads that you have that mixed multitude that go out with them. Because God made himself irrefutable for all of this. I think one thing that's pretty interesting, if you know how the Egyptians view things, a lot of things is cyclical. They have a lot of myths of death and rebirth, like reincarnation of the Pharaoh always coming back and being like the perpetual son of Horus or Ra. Whether it be that or where we talked about like that each night, the sun gets swallowed up by the underworld, and then the Apophis servant has, forget the name of that one, has to go down there and battle with the chaos serpent to make sure that the sun will rise again in the morning. Everything is kind of on this regenerative cycle is the way they view things. And it starts in the east and it ends in the west. So if you go and you look at maps in Egypt, all their tombs are buried over there in the west, because they saw like where the setting of the sun went, that's where the beginning of death begins, if you will. And then each morning, when the sun's coming up there in the east, well, this is our rebirth. And I found this kind of interesting because it's specified and God's specific about it. I imagine there was a point to it. In Exodus 10:13 it says, "So Moses stretched out his staff over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind upon the land all that day and all that night. When it was morning, the east wind had brought the locusts." And in 10:19, "And the Lord turned the wind into a strong west wind, which lifted the locusts and drove them into the Red Sea. Not a single locust was left in all the country of Egypt." That was in 10:19. So, coming from the east, where we're supposed to have new rebirth and life starting each day, we got death and destruction. That's where the locusts come from. They come from the east. And then where we're supposed to sit there and, have death and destruction going into the west is where we have our life-saving wind that carries away this death and deliverance that delivers us from this death that is coming from the east. And I just thought that was kind of neat because God kind of stands that idea on its heads for as far as how they see things. In this, so they get done petitioning Pharaoh and telling him, that this man's become a snare to us. How long is he going to bear with it? And so Pharaoh ends up calling Abraham or Moses back to him and tells him to go. But who's going to go with him? Moses tells him all of us. Pharaoh's like, nope, just the men. Because you don't need anybody else to sit there and go worship your God. You say that's who you're going to go do. You're going to go worship your God. Well, you just need the men to do that. And that's where Moses tells them, no, like all of them are coming with us. That's when we go ahead and we end up having this plague. Afterwards, in 10:15, like it states that there's nothing green left. Pharaoh hastily calls him back. In 16, says he sinned against God and you. Forgive me only this once. 18, Moses prays for him. 19, no locusts are left. They're sent on their way. And then in 20, Pharaoh doesn't let him go. Once again. So then in 21, this is when we're on back one of these just do it plagues. In our little pattern that we got going. And in 10:21, Moses stretches out his hand and sits there and says that this is a darkness to be felt. Find the right paper here. Good paper. So starting in verse 21. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, a darkness to be felt." So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was pitch darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all the people of Israel had light where they lived. Then Pharaoh called Moses and said, "Go serve the Lord. Your little ones may also go with you. Only let your flocks and your herds remain behind." You must also let us have sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice the Lord our God. Our livestock also must go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind, for we must take them to serve the Lord our God. And we do not know what we must serve the Lord until we arrive there. The Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. He would not let them go. Then Pharaoh said to him, Get away from me. Take care never to see my face again, for on that day you see my face, you shall die. And Moses said, As you say, I will not see your face again. So here at this last one of darkness, you got a couple of these quote-unquote gods. We're getting right up to the top of the pecking order, so to speak. You have Ra, which would have been known as Amun-Ra, Atum, Ra, Harak. He's seen as a human with a falcon head. We've talked before that a lot of times, sometimes they just have a serpent, or sometimes they have a falcon head on there. Like that would be up there on the uraeus of Pharaoh as well. Or the uraeus was a snake, but on the crown of Pharaoh as well. You'd have the uraeus snake and you'd have the falcon head. And he was said to be the first king of Egypt. This is who Pharaoh supposedly descends from. He's controller of the sky and the weather. He would have been attributed as being the creator of the universe, of all life, the ruler of the sky, the earth, and the underworld. So this is God over everything as far as they see it. Source of light, warmth, and growth. Then you also would have had Horus. And it gets a little confusing on whether or not these were actually different deities, depending on like who you're reading and at what time. It seems like at some point they become commingled. Horus is, and some people say like the power of Ra was Horus. I don't know exactly how that works, but I know he's got a falcon head too. Maybe that's the thing that's confusing me, is that they both got these falcon heads. And Horus, his right eye would have been the sun, and his left eye the moon. And I don't know why I never thought of this before, but like when I think of the darkness that was on Egypt, I'd always think of it as just kind of as an eclipse, or even a dark night. I never thought about like the stars being shut out, or the moon being shut out, in addition to the sun. That's a whole different story. I don't know if any of y'all ever been in a cave, but go into a cave, feel the pitch black of that darkness, get plunged underwater in the middle of the night where you can't see any light shining through it. It's a whole nother level of darkness, and I imagine this is only a microcosm of what's being described when it says a darkness that can be felt. I don't know if there was some kind of aspect where God put despair into their hearts during that time. I don't know if it was just a fear of like thinking that the world was ending. I don't know what it means by that, and a lot of people have a lot of different ideas, that they were somehow supernaturally made to feel depressed. Some people will go as far as say something like that. All I know is they say a darkness that could be felt, and that nobody got up and out of their bed for 3 days. And maybe that's where people just take that a little too far, and they infer that because they didn't get out of bed, they must have been depressed. I don't know. But 3 days of complete darkness, not a star, not the moon, not the sun. And then over there in Goshen, they got light. I'm questioning some things if I'm the Egyptians. I'm a little bit worried. I might be willing to bet that I'd probably be trying to join that mixed multitude that says, you know, like, hey, been worshiping wrong over here. Do you know about your God? And that's the other thing I wonder about in all of this is, obviously the Israelites were well versed in Egyptian customs at this point. They'd probably been participating with them quite a bit. I don't know that they've been worshiping God correctly in all this time. Maybe some of them have even gotten to the point where they don't necessarily believe in the God of their fathers. They just know that they're of a certain people that exist in this land, and their lot is slavery. And they hear fables and tales from a time gone back when they were a favored people and given a promise. And maybe their grandfather or their uncle or somebody in their life always is looking back to that. So I often think of these plagues also as an introduction for them. It's not just to the Egyptians, but he's reminding Israel who he is as well. And he's making sure that they know and they can believe in him, that there is nothing else to be feared. There's nothing that he's not responsible for. And if I say that you're going to be good and it's going to go well with you and I'm going to take care of you, you can trust in that. Even though we're going to this scary place off in the wilderness and there's nothing to provide for you, don't worry, I'm going to provide for you. Don't worry, I'm going to protect you. Don't worry, like everything's going to be good and all right. Look at all I've already done before you. I think that's probably one of the reasons why God sits there and one of his most, apparently most favorite titles to address himself as is the one who led you out of bondage. The one who led you out of slavery there in Egypt, who displayed my might with a strong arm and a strong hand and an outstretched arm. I mean, this is a way that he's constantly referred to there in the Old Testament. And I think that was probably because that was his means of introduction to that en masse. So right there we had, when Pharaoh gets called back, or calls back Moses, tells him, go out but leave your flocks. I imagine also that in there, Pharaoh, he's lost a lot of his livestock. He's lost a lot of his cattle. He's ruined economically as far as them as a productive nation. I'm not letting the slaves go with the cattle. Okay, you guys could go, but we're gonna keep the cattle. That way we still got some semblance of wealth. We still got some kind of food, whatever it was that was going on in their head. I can understand where he's like, yeah, not the cattle too though. Not a hoof's gonna remain. All of our cattle's gotta go with us. Don't know what we're gonna need to serve God, but we're gonna need it all because who knows what he wants. And I can imagine that's why Pharaoh got pretty hot and bothered about it and says, hey, you see me again, you're going to die. And nevertheless, they're going to see each other again. And spoiler, but Moses doesn't die. So now we move on to the death of the firstborn. In there we have, it starts off there in Exodus. I appreciate, Thad having his lesson there on the Passover, because it was something that I was planning on jumping over this morning, because I think the Passover deserves its own lesson in and of itself because of the way that it relates to communion. But so we will pass that point, but starting here in Exodus 11, verse 1. And the Lord said to Moses, yet one more plague I will bring upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterward he will let you go from here. When he lets you go, he will drive you away completely. Speak now in the hearing of the people that they ask every man of his neighbor and every woman of her neighbor for silver and gold jewelry. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants and in the sight of the people. So Moses said, thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out in the midst of Egypt, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle. There shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there has never been, nor ever will be again. But not a dog shall growl against any of the people of Israel, either man or beast, that you may know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. And all these your servants shall come down to me and bow down to me, saying, get out, you and all the people who follow you. After that I will go out. And he went out from Pharaoh in hot anger. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not listen to you, that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. Moses and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh, and the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the people of Israel go out of the land. Go forward, you're going to end up finding that this is the last plague, and so we'll kind of wrap it up with the thoughts on it. But the Egyptians are going to shower them with gifts. Like it says, the Lord gave them favor, and they receive silver and gold and clothing. And one thing that's interesting to know is that these would have been gifts that were generally presented at the temple. These are what they worshiped with. These were their offerings. They didn't bring animals to be sacrificed. They brought their wealth. They brought silver and gold and fine linens. That's something that they did in that culture. So now they're giving these gifts that they would normally reserve for the gods to the people of Israel as they ask them to please kindly leave their land. They're being treated as the gods themselves as far as the offerings go. I thought that was pretty cool. Another thing that I love in this, I always read that 11:7 where it says, not even a dog shall growl. And it's like, well, man, like God's going to make everybody to be at just peace with them, you know, and that's kind of like hard to fathom. And I think there was an aspect of that where, you know, nobody, maybe they're scared, you know, they don't want to take the chance of offending God who's just visited all these plagues upon them by saying something wayward to one of his charges, his children, the people of Israel. I can get that, because there's been times where somebody maybe looked across at one of my kids when they were still young and innocent and got my hair up pretty quick. And so maybe there's a view of it like that. But with this being the death of the firstborn, I find this almost as like an Easter egg in a movie, you know, where it says not even a dog shall growl. Egypt had two gods that were assigned to funeral rites. They were said to clear the way in battle going forth before the army. They were said to guard the dead on their journey to the afterlife. They were conductors in that. They were evoked in all funeral rites there in Egypt. And both of them had dog heads. One was Anubis, which would have been seen as the god of the dead for funeral rites, protector of graves and the underworld guide. And the other one would have been Wepwawet. There's a lot of W's and A's, like W-A-P-W-A-W-E-T, Wapawet. And he was a jackal or a wolf with a mace or a bow, and he was, once again, funeral rites. He was seen as like leading them into battle and war. Royalty. He was the opener of the ways, the clearer of routes for Pharaoh's army to proceed over, and he did the same for the dead. So when I read that now and I hear not even a dog shall growl, like, yeah, your gods that are in charge of death, they're not going to be able to stop. They're not even going to make a single noise against anything that I'm going to do. And so if you're taking counsel in them that surely you won't be ripped from this life because I said it, trust me, not even a dog's going to growl. And if you don't do what I say, I'm going to kill off all the firstborn in Egypt. And so I think of that one as pretty neat. And then we're back to Pharaoh again, because we got to keep in mind that Pharaoh is seen as his responsibility is maintaining ma'at, like order within the human realm. He is responsible for, you know, maintaining that between chaos and order, like think yin and yang. That's Pharaoh's role. That's what he's responsible for. So surely he's going to make sure that, you know, him being the first son of God himself, which is the way that he was seen, he's not going to go ahead and let our firstborn be killed. I didn't have time to dig in and like pull up exactly what it was, because it's contended anyway. But there's evidence that I think it was Amenhotep II. He was succeeded by whatever the name of that pharaoh was, but he was the second born. And when you go and you find out he had to go to the Sphinx and get a vision that sat there and said that he was able to rule, but it was because his older brother was killed, and they believe it was during this plague itself. And there's a lot of evidence about that, but people argue about which pharaoh it occurred during, and I don't know the subject matter that well to be able to, you know, make a convincing argument one way or another. But I do find it interesting. That's about it on these 10 plagues. God came, he sat there and he made himself known to the Egyptian people. He made it where it was easy for them to believe that he was in charge of all that he claimed to believe. And even if they didn't want to believe it, he made it irrefutable. He gave them reason to take great confidence as he led them out of the land. He He gave opportunity to all these Egyptians to be able to turn from serving these foreign gods and to come along and join his people. Some availed themselves of that. I think of the parallel that is to our journey nowadays, because when you follow that forward and how Israel would have been this exclusive society to begin with, and then it was opened up to you. I mean, yeah, you could have proselytes back then, but eventually it became open to all of us former Gentiles, so that we could come into God's presence, that we could avail ourselves of his grace, so that we were able to be counted amongst his children. And God's the same today, yesterday, and tomorrow. Like he was doing the same thing back there in Egypt as well. He gave them opportunity to be able to be a part of his family. And that's something that I believe everybody here that is of age is already a baptized believer, but want to give the opportunity that same as God was patient back then, we need to remember that the Lord is not slow to fulfill his promises, some count slowness, but is patient towards you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. And I think that that's a beautiful thing that he gives us this opportunity every week to be able to, reaffirm our desire to follow him, to be able to forsake our previous ways, to be able to come together as brethren, ask for forgiveness, ask for prayer. If there's anybody that needs to avail themselves of that today, I invite you to come forward as we stand and sing.